Peace. This is Wise for Wise Words Media, and we are a couple days away from Thanksgiving. And this time of the year always makes me reminiscent of when I was younger. My younger years in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, I was a huge wrestling fan, huge wrestling fanatic, and Thanksgiving week always meant the Survivor Series. So the Survivor Series, especially those days, was groups of 4, groups of 5 going against one another in an elimination style matchup where it turns into a handicap matchup where it could be like 5-on-3 or 4-on-2. I've even seen like 3 or 4-on-1. And it was always one of the most unique events that the WWF would throw every year. So in honor of the Survivor Series and with groups in mind, today's Top 5 Tuesday is going to be Top 5 Wrestling Stables, Top 5 Wrestling Groups of all time. So at number 5, I'm going to start with D-Generation X. DX was one of the most pivotal and crucial reasons why the WWF didn't go out of business. They, along with Stone Cold Steve Austin, ushered in the Attitude Era, which was their only way that they could compete with WCW, because WCW was dominating the Monday Night Wars. And the creative geniuses at the time, knowing that the Jerry Springer show was very controversial and that controversy brought a lot of viewership, they said the way we're going to get ratings, we're going to turn WWF into practically the Jerry Springer show. And DX were two of the poster childs for that. Between Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna, they were the founding members. They would also go on to find a couple other guys that had good chemistry with one another, and that was Billy Gunn and Road Dogg Jesse James. And then when X-Pac came back, DX really took it to another level. They were entertaining, very funny, and one of their most classic moments was when they went to WCW, to Ted Turner's building in a military tank with military helmets on, and they declared war officially on WCW. That was classic. So they, to me, what they did for the WWF, as entertaining as they were in those like mid to late 90s years, gotta give DX their respect. DX number 5. Also for saving the WWF. Number 4. At number 4, we're going to keep that number handy, because number 4 is the Four Horsemen. The Four Horsemen, when you talk about the Mount Rushmore of stables, groups, the Horsemen have to be in it. This was a group. There were different factions of it. You had the one with Ric Flair, Arn and Ole Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Lex Luger was a part of it at one point. Then you had like later years, you had like Mongo McMichael, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Chris Benoit. That was a pretty dope one too. But my favorite faction of the Horsemen was the one from the early 90s, from late 80s, early 90s, which was Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Sid Vicious, and Barry Windham. Ric Flair is the most charismatic wrestler of all time. He is the consensus GOAT, the greatest wrestler consensus-wise of all time. I mean, some will argue and say that Hulk Hogan's the greatest. Hulk Hogan is on record on the Ric Flair documentary And Hulk Hogan said, people praise me, but I tell them, no, look over there. That's the man, Ric Flair. So Ric Flair, you want to talk about charisma, you want to talk about the ability to cut the greatest promos. And not only that, you have the mouthpiece in Ric Flair, you know, with all the flashy women and the flashy clothes and all the beautiful women. And I remember one of the dopest promos was him getting in a Learjet with jewelry and fine women during the recession. So that was ill. But then you got the mouthpiece, and in stark contrast, you got the enforcer, Arn Anderson, who's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Arn Anderson was very, very dark demeanor, no nonsense, very short with words, but very big on actions, man. Master of the spine buster, dope wrestler. And Sid Vicious, when he hit the scene, this man was one of the most intimidating, imposing wrestlers of his time. And he went on to have success not only in WCW, but WWF as well, winning the championship. And Barry Windham, who was a very good worker. For a tall guy, he was good bouncing off the ropes, off the turnbuckles. He was very good, very talented wrestler. That was my favorite faction of the Horsemen. They would often go to war with Sting, the Steiner Brothers, and Lex Luger. And if you haven't seen it yet, do yourself a favor and watch Fall Brawl, which it was an annual event, annual pay-per-view for WCW, where they would have two cages and 2 rings surrounded by a big cage. And in these enclosed rings, they would have like an elimination style matchup too. And these were some of the bloodiest matchups in North American history at that time. Like WCW wasn't known for blood, but these matches would be bloody. They were so entertaining. I go back and watch them to this day. Classic matches. But the Horsemen, not only promo-wise, but in the ring, great. So I give them number 4. At number 3, I am going to go with the team. This team is so underrated. This stable is one of the dopest stables in wrestling history that I don't see they get enough praise, and that is Paul Heyman's, or at that time in WCW, it was called Paulie Dangerously, the Dangerous Alliance. That team was no joke. I mean, you want to talk about a who's who of like dope wrestlers and villains. You had Rick Rude, who, thank you to WCW, gave him his proper due, and they put the world title on him. They gave him the strap. But you had Rick Rude, Arn Anderson, the enforcer, same Arn Anderson from the 4 Horsemen. Rick Rude, Arn Anderson. You had Larry Zbyszko. You had beautiful Bobby Eaton. And you had a young, up-and-coming Stone Cold Steve Austin with long blonde hair, who was called Stunning Steve Austin. Stunning Steve Austin had one of the longest tenures of television champion in WCW history, man. That dude used to defend that title every Saturday. I remember watching at 6:05. That's when they had the 05 on TBS. Everything came on at 05, 5 minutes after the hour. I used to watch Stone Cold every Saturday. He was one of my favorite wrestlers before he was even Stone Cold. He was he had blonde hair. He used to come in a robe, and he was called Stunning Steve Austin. Even then, you saw the talent, man. He was one of my favorite wrestlers. But that Dangerous Alliance team was dope, man. Who's who of villains at that time, of heels. And on the subject of watching Fall Brawl, they too were in a classic Fall Brawl matchup against Sting, Dustin Rhodes, Ricky Steamboat, and the Steiner Brothers. Classic match. Do yourself a favor, watch that one too. But yeah, the Dangerous Alliance, managed by one of the greatest managers of all time, Paul Heyman, Paulie Dangerously, dope team. At number 2, I'm gonna go with the new world order. If you were a teenager or young at the time watching wrestling, this was it, man. NWO. The way that the NWO made their entrance into wrestling was classic. You have Razor Ramon, or Scott Hall rather, come in through the crowd to the ring, gets on a microphone in the ring and starts saying, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. And this is WCW, where the big boys play." We'll see about that. And we, as young guys and as fans, we didn't know the ins and outs of contracts, that Scott Hall's contract was up and he signed with WCW. Well, we, from our young optics, was, whoa, that's Razor Ramon. I just seen him wrestling over there. He's coming. He says, "You don't know why I'm here. You know who I am," because he couldn't use the likeness or name of Razor Ramon. So he didn't come dressed like Razor. But he gave you enough Razor. And it was like, you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. You want a war? We're going to give you a war. And those words gave birth to the Monday Night Wars. Scott Hall is the father of the Monday Night Wars. After him came big man Kevin Nash, and then the heel turn of all heel turns. This moment is one of the most iconic moments in all of wrestling history. At Bash of the Beach 96, when Hulk Hogan turned heel and told all his fans to stick it. Yo, how you go from the greatest hero to the most antagonistic villain heel of all time. Gotta give Hogan his respect in a blink of an eye. He did it. So then they started growing their faction with more members of previous big names from WWF, like $1 Million Man came along, and guys like Mr. Perfect. And so you started Ravishing Rick Rude. You started getting guys that were a part of big names in the WWF and became a part of WCW's NWO faction. But, you know, too much of a good thing sometimes is no good. As they started to grow in members, it got out of hand, it got crazy. But those early stages of the NWO, when it was mainly like former WWF fighters, wrestlers, and they were using that whole angle of invasion, there was no time in wrestling. Those promos with the black and white, when you hear the music, the new world order, and they start cutting promos against WCW, nothing in the history of wrestling matches that. That was life-changing right there. But number 1 can only be reserved for one man and one team. And that is Bobby the Brain Heenan and his Heenan family. The Heenan family was such a dope collection of wrestlers in WWF. I mean, they had all sectors locked down. World Championship fighters for the world title, you had Andre the Giant. You had Andre. You had Intercontinental champions, legendary Intercontinental champions such as Mr. Perfect, Ravishing Rick Rude. You had legendary tag team, the Brainbusters. Yo, they were so ill. They even had the most legendary jobber of all time, the Brooklyn Brawler, who was a part of the Heenan family. How you have a jobber, a part of your stable? That was one of the illest things, man. But yeah, between Andre, Mr. Perfect, Ravishing Rick Rude, the Brainbusters, Haku, I believe, was in there also. Like, that was a team that just, that collection right there is just iconic, man. An iconic, legendary group that held a lot of straps, man. They had a lot of titles in their time together under Bobby Heenan. So yeah, they that name, just when you look at the pictures of them, like at Survivor Series, when the Heenan family would go at it against most likely like Hulk Hogan or somebody and his team. Like, those, just that collection alone, man, just those pictures of them together, nothing matches it. So that's my top 5 stables in wrestling history. DX at 5, 4 Horsemen at 4. What part of self? You had DX at 5, 4 Horsemen at 4, Dangerous Alliance at 3, NWO at 2, Heenan family at 1. So I want to hear from my wrestling friends, man, my wrestling heads, old school wrestling heads. Let me know in the comment section your top 5 wrestling stables, wrestling teams of all time. Peace.